During a fight, my son said he always loved his mom more than me. 2 days later, he called me at 3 a.m. from a casino. My response changed everything. The man at the security desk leaned across the counter and dropped his voice so low I had to read his lips. "Mr. Okafor," he said, "your son didn't make that call. Someone made it for him." I had walked into that building already running calculations, already building theories, already preparing myself for whatever Marcus was about to tell me. The debt, the panic, the night that went sideways. I was not prepared for that. I was not prepared for the man to slide a printed photograph across the counter and tap it once with his fingernail. I was not prepared to recognize the woman in it, because it was Renata, my ex-wife, Marcus's mother, the woman he'd chosen out loud to my face 2 days ago. Standing at the high-limit lounge of a private casino floor at 11:52 p.m., with her arm around a man who was not her boyfriend, and with my 21-year-old son seated 3 feet away, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with alcohol. I picked up the photograph. My hands were completely still. That's how I knew something in me had finally stopped flinching. Let me back up. I had been co-parenting with Renata Okafor for 12 years when I stopped pretending it was working. 12 years of pickup schedules that changed without notice. 12 years of Marcus coming home from her weekends wound up and brittle, full of opinions he hadn't had before he left. 12 years of Renata positioning herself as the fun one, the loose one, the yes woman, the parent who treated parenting like a guest appearance. She was good at it. I'll give her that. She had the kind of charm that read as warmth right up until the moment you needed something real. Tall, easy in a room, the type of woman who made bartenders laugh and forgot to tip them. She remembered names. She asked questions that sounded interested. She had a hug that communicated "I see you," which is the most efficient lie a person can tell. When Marcus was small, he didn't notice the difference between a parent who showed up and a parent who performed showing up. He just saw mom. Mom with the Saturday plans and the spontaneous road trips and the credit card she let him use for whatever he wanted at the mall. Mom who let him stay up past midnight and eat whatever he wanted and skip the inhaler he was supposed to use every day because he hated the taste. He didn't see the Sunday nights, the homework still undone, the emotional hangover he'd carry into Monday, exhausted and defensive, wanting a fight because he didn't know how to name what he was actually feeling. I saw those. I drove to the pharmacy for the inhaler refill he hated. I sat with him through the homework and the moods and the particular misery of a 12-year-old who loved his mother more than she deserved and didn't know how to hold that. I paid for those things too, in ways that didn't show up on any invoice. Renata and I had married young. I was 27, she was 25, and we were both operating on the belief that wanting the same things and being charming about it was the same as being compatible. It took 6 years and 1 child to clarify the difference. She wanted the idea of a family, the optics of it, the warmth it generated in rooms. I wanted the actual thing, the boring, expensive, inconvenient actual thing. We divorced when Marcus was 10. The mediation took 3 months and produced a custody agreement that looked balanced on paper, alternating weekends, shared holidays, both parents listed on school records and insurance and emergency contact forms. In practice, Marcus lived with me. He slept under my roof 300 days a year. I managed his asthma, his grades, his therapy appointments, his social anxiety, his inhaler refills, the refinancing of my mortgage after Renata stopped paying her share of his health insurance for 5 months, and I had to absorb the gap. I did all of that while working full-time as a hospital administrator, a job that required a particular talent for making difficult systems function through sheer organizational will. By the time he was 13, Marcus had adopted Renata's version of events completely. I was the rule keeper, the bill payer, the man who made him take his medication on schedule and said no to things that weren't safe. Renata was freedom. I understood it, even when it hurt. Children always love the parent who costs them less. That's not a character flaw. It's just youth. You grow out of it if you're lucky, and if the world is honest with you in time. What I didn't understand, not yet, was how deliberate it had been. The fight happened on a Thursday. Marcus had come home from a weekend at Renata's with a restless, picking energy, the kind that needed a target. I'd asked him to call the insurance company about a prescription refill, a 10-minute task I'd been covering for him for months. He'd said he didn't have time. I'd said he did. It escalated the way things do when someone is looking for a reason. And then he said it. "I've always loved Mom more than you." Flat, steady, like he'd been saving it. "That's why she left. You're so annoying." I looked at him for a moment, then I walked out of the room, not because I had nothing to say, because I had too much and none of it would have landed. Marcus at 21 is the same as Marcus at 16. When he's decided something, he's already left the conversation. Anything I said would become evidence for the case he was building against me. So I walked out. I made dinner. I ate alone. I paid 3 bills online and went to bed. I did not cry. I was past that. You grieve a dynamic, and then at some point you just watch it, the way you watch weather, aware of it, not destroyed by it. What I did not know lying in the dark that Thursday night, was that Marcus had spent that weekend with his mother being quietly, carefully positioned. I didn't know that yet. I was just a man who'd raised a kid alone for a decade and been told he was annoying for it. The call came at 3:11 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock before I picked up. An old reflex from years of overnight emergencies, Marcus's asthma attacks, the car accident he'd had at 19, my mother's fall 2 winters ago. I'd trained myself to answer ready. His voice was thin, pushed too high. "Dad, my card got declined. I need $3,500 right now or they won't let me leave." I lay completely still. $3,500, 3 a.m. A casino I'd never heard of, won't let me leave. "Which place?" I said. He gave me a name, something that sounded like a private club. "Members only," he said. He'd gone with friends. I knew Marcus's friends. He didn't have any who belonged to private casino floors. "Marcus, how did you—" "Dad, please. I don't have time to explain. I just need you to send the money. E-transfer or Zelle. Right now, please." Something in me went quiet, not cold. Quiet. The way a room goes quiet right before you figure out what's wrong with it. I thought about Thursday. I thought about, I've always loved Mom more than you. I thought about 12 years of 3 a.m. phone calls that never went to Renata, because Renata's phone went to voicemail after 9. "Call your mom," I said, and I hung up. I turned off the lamp. I lay in the dark. I did not sleep immediately. Let me not pretend otherwise. I lay there for 20 minutes, and I felt the full weight of what I'd done, the refusing, the deliberate stepping back. I felt it the way you feel a tooth you've just had pulled, the specific shape of an absence. And then I thought, he is 21 years old. He is at a casino, not a burning building. And the parent he loves more than me has a phone and a credit card and 12 years of goodwill she's never had to spend. Let her spend some. I fell asleep at 3:47 a.m. I slept without dreaming. 7:48 a.m., a number I didn't recognize. "Is this James Okafor?" "Yes. This is Officer Lena Brandt, downtown precinct. We have your son here. He was detained in connection with an incident at a private establishment. There's a financial complaint involved. You'll want to come down." I set the phone on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the specific quality of a moment before everything changes. The last second of the before. Then I got up, made coffee, drank it standing at the kitchen window, let the neighbor's dog pull them down the block like nothing was wrong with the world. Then I got in my car and drove. I did not rush. I did not call Renata. I did not text Marcus to say I was coming. I drove and I thought about the phrase private establishment and financial complaint and won't let me leave. I thought about the way Marcus had said those words, pushed too high, too fast, the consonants slightly blurred, not drunk. Not exactly, something else. And I thought about the fact that Marcus didn't go to casinos. He went to his friends' apartments and coffee shops and the occasional concert. He was not a gambler. He'd never been. So who had brought him there? I pulled into the precinct lot and sat for a moment in the car. The sky was that flat gray that means the day hasn't decided yet. The building looked the way precincts always look. Permanent and bored, fluorescent and concrete. A place that has seen everything and is not impressed by any of it. I got out of the car, and I walked in already knowing this wasn't going to end inside these walls. This was only where it started. The sliding doors opened. Officer Lena Brandt met me at the desk, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, the kind of tired that comes from a good night's sleep, never quite catching up. She shook my hand like she meant it. "Your son is fine," she said first. "Not injured, not charged with anything, but there's a situation we need to walk through with you before he's released." "Okay," I said. "Someone filed a complaint against him for non-payment. The establishment is claiming he ran up a marker of $3,300 at the tables and walked away without settling. Your son says he didn't even buy in himself, says he was a guest of someone who brought him there and told him everything was covered." "Who brought him?" Brandt opened her mouth. That's when the man at the front desk leaned over and stopped me cold. His name tag said T. Avery, administrative. He had reading glasses pushed up on his head and the look of a man who had already decided to tell me something he probably wasn't supposed to, not out of recklessness, out of the particular solidarity of people who have watched this exact story before and know which side they're on. "Mr. Okafor," he said quietly, "your son didn't make that call. Someone made it for him." He slid the photograph across the counter. It was a still pulled from surveillance footage and printed on regular paper, slightly grainy at the edges the way casino cameras always are. Timestamp in the upper right corner, 11:52 p.m. I looked at it for a long time. Renata, the high-limit lounge, her arm around a man I didn't recognize. 40-ish, well-dressed, the body language of someone who didn't know he should be asking more questions. Marcus in the background, 3 feet away, seated at a private table with chips in front of him, and the specific blankness of someone who has just realized he is somewhere he doesn't entirely understand. He was looking at his phone. The way you look at your phone when you're trying to figure out how to leave without causing a scene. I picked up the photograph. My hands were completely still. That's how I knew something in me had finally stopped flinching. I stood in the fluorescent light of that tired precinct, holding a piece of paper that had been printed in the last hour, and I understood, really understood, not just suspected, what had been done, not just to Marcus, to all of them. Where did this come from? I said. Establishment has cameras. When the complaint came in, we pulled the footage as part of intake procedure. That's your son, yeah? That's my son, I said, and that's his mother. Avery looked at Brant. Brant looked at me. She's not listed as his emergency contact, Brant said carefully. No, I said, she wouldn't be. Here is what the story was. The casino, Lockhart Club, members only, minimum buy-in $1,500 per session, had a guest policy. You could bring someone in as a guest if you were a member in good standing. Renata was a member, had been for 2 years, which I did not know. She'd brought Marcus as her guest, told him they were celebrating, some work thing, vague. Renata was always vague about money, introduced him to some people, then, somewhere around midnight, slipped out, left him there, left him at a table with a marker running in his name, a marker he hadn't opened, a marker he had no way of paying. The call at 3 a.m., send $3,500 or they won't let me leave, was real. The panic was real. The trapped feeling was real. What wasn't real was that Marcus had done anything wrong. What was real was that his mother had put him there and walked out. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked Officer Brant if I could speak with a detective. Detective Aaron Castellano had been with the Financial Crimes Unit for 15 years. He was compact and precise, the kind of man who wrote in block letters and didn't waste words. He met with me in a side room. Plastic chairs, a table bolted to the floor, a whiteboard someone had half erased. I told him what I knew. I told him about the photograph. I told him about the 3 a.m. Aaron Castellano had been with the Financial Crimes Unit for 15 years. He was compact and precise, the kind of man who wrote in block letters and didn't waste words. He met with me in a side room. Plastic chairs, a table bolted to the floor, a whiteboard someone had half erased. I told him what I knew. I told him about the photograph. I told him about the 3 a.m. call and Renata's history, and the thing that had been nagging at me since I'd gotten off the phone with Brant that morning. He didn't call me first, I said. He called someone else first. I know because there was a pause, almost 20 seconds, before he said my name, like he'd just switched calls. Who did he call before me? Castellano looked at his notes. According to the call log the club provided, your son called one number at 3:03 a.m. That call lasted 9 seconds. Then he called you at 3:11. Whose number? Registered to a Renata Okafor, he said. Belmont Street address. 9 seconds. Renata had picked up, he'd started to explain, and she'd hung up in 9 seconds. And then he'd called me, and I had told him to call his mom. I sat with the specific cruelty of that for a moment. Not the cruelty toward me, the cruelty toward him. Detective, I said, I want to understand whether what she did is actionable. Leaving him, he's 21, but he's on my insurance and she brought him there as her guest. Leaving him with a marker he didn't open and no way to pay it. Is that just bad parenting or is it something else? Castellano was quiet for a moment. That depends, he said, on whether this is the first time. But Castellano did, or started to, once he ran Renata's name through the financial complaint database and found 2 other incidents in a 16-month window. Different venues, different young men listed as the account holder for markers they hadn't opened. He called me back that same afternoon. His voice had a different quality to it, still precise, still block letters, but something underneath had shifted. Mr. Okafor, he said, I want to ask you some follow-up questions. I sat down. Your ex-wife's name came up in 2 prior financial complaints. One at a private gaming lounge called the Carrington Room, 14 months ago. One at a members club in the West Side District, 6 months after that. In both cases, the complaint was filed against a male guest she'd registered. In both cases, your ex-wife was not present when the bill came due. I wrote the names on a notepad. The Carrington Room, West Side District. Were charges filed? I said. No. Both guests settled rather than contest. One paid in full that night. The other disputed it, but ultimately withdrew the complaint. He paused. These things usually go away, Mr. Okafor. People don't want the attention. They just want to be done. I understood that. I had been one of those people. Not at a club, but in my own way. Paying to make the problem stop. Not because I couldn't fight it, but because fighting was expensive and silence was faster. The pattern had a shape. Bring someone in as a guest. Let them get comfortable. Marker running in their name. House policy. Standard practice, fine print on the guest registration form that most people didn't read. Disappear before the bill came. Let the guest figure it out. The venues complained. The guests, embarrassed, trapped, often young, usually paid to make it stop. Nobody had connected the incidents to a single name until now. I sat at my kitchen table after I got off the phone with Castellano, looking at the 2 names I'd written down. The Carrington Room, West Side District. 2 men who had paid and gone quiet. 2 markers cleared. 2 nights Renata had gotten away with it, and then Marcus, and then me, not paying. For the first time in 12 years, not paying. I sat in that plastic chair and felt something slide into place. Not shock, something colder older than shock. Understanding. Renata hadn't just been careless with Marcus. She'd used him. She'd used him the same way she'd used the others, as a name on a form, a warm body to hold the marker while she walked out the door. And the genius of it, the truly specific ugliness of using Marcus, was that she knew I'd come. She knew that whatever had been said, whatever had happened between us, I would show up at a police station for my son. She knew that I would handle it quietly, the way I always handled things, and the way it would end was with me absorbing the cost and her never having to explain herself. And if I'd sent the money at 3 a.m., the way I always did, the way I had for 12 years, she'd have gotten away with it. Marcus would have written it off as a bad night. I'd have paid the marker and paid for the therapy and paid for the silence. She knew that. She'd built her whole life on knowing that. I retained an attorney on a Monday morning. Her name was Teresa Hanlon. Hanlon and Associates, family law and civil litigation, 18 years in practice. She had the kind of office that was deliberately not intimidating. Good light, real plants, no trophies on the wall. She listened to everything I said without writing a single note, and at the end, she put her hands flat on the desk and said, "Okay, here's what we have and here's what we can do." What we had: Detective Castellano's preliminary findings, the club's camera footage, Renata's call log, the 2 prior complaints tied to the same pattern of behavior, and a paper trail of Marcus's account. His name on the guest registration form, his name on the complaint, his name on a marker he'd never opened. What we could do: civil complaint for damages, Marcus's name on the debt, his emotional distress, the incident itself, potentially a case for fraud, depending on what Castellano's investigation turned up, and a formal complaint to the club's licensing authority, which Hanlon said had teeth. "She's going to say it was a misunderstanding," I said. "They always do," Hanlon said. "That's why we have documentation." She pulled out a folder. "Exhibit A," she said, tapping the surveillance screenshot. "Exhibit B, the call log. Exhibit C, the prior complaints. Exhibit D," she paused, "is a financial forensics report we're going to commission. I want to know exactly what Renata Okafor's relationship with that club looks like over the past 2 years. Memberships, charges, guest registrations, all of it. That's going to cost money," I said. "Less than you've spent covering for her," she said. She wasn't wrong. Marcus came home on a Sunday. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not physically. He's always been lean, dark-haired like his mother, with the kind of cheekbones that photograph well and eyes that give too much away. But he came through my front door carrying himself like someone who'd been deflated. He sat at the kitchen table and I made tea and I didn't say anything for a while. Finally, he said, "She left me there. I know. She just left. I didn't even see her go. 1 minute she was there and then she wasn't. And then the guy from the floor came over and said the marker hadn't been settled. And I didn't even know there was a marker. I didn't buy in. I had 1 chip stack that she handed me." He stopped. I watched him work through it. "I called her first," he said quietly, "before I called you." "I know that too," she answered. He looked at the table. She said it wasn't her problem. She said I shouldn't have agreed to go somewhere I couldn't afford. I let that sit. "Then I called you," he said. "And I told you to call your mom." The silence between us had a texture to it. "I didn't know," Marcus said. "I know you didn't." All those things I said, about how she was the real one, the better one. I didn't, Marcus. I waited until he looked at me. "You don't have to do this right now. I want to, okay? I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I said what I said. I'm sorry I believed what I believed." His voice was steady. He's always been better at steady than I gave him credit for. I think I knew some of it wasn't true. I think she made it so easy to believe the easier version. I thought about 12 years of groceries and prescription pickups and 3 a.m. worries that had no one to share them. I thought about 12 years of being the rule and her being the exception. "She's good at easy," I said. "Yeah," he looked at his tea. "She is." He described himself, when I asked, as a financial archaeologist. I dig until I find the bones. He spent 3 weeks pulling Renata's financial activity at the Lockhart Club and 2 other private venues in the area. The method, he explained to me in Hanlon's conference room, was straightforward once you knew what to look for. Private members-only clubs typically register markers under the name of whoever signed the guest form, not the member, but their guest. It's a liability mechanism. The member vouches for the guest. The guest is technically responsible for any charges made at their table. In practice, this works fine. A friend brings a friend, covers the marker, everyone goes home, except when the member never intends to cover the marker. Except when the member registers the guest, lets a marker accumulate under the guest's name, and then leaves before anyone notices. The club, following protocol, presents the bill to the name on the form. The guest, surprised, confused, often embarrassed, sometimes pays to avoid the scene. Sometimes the club calls the police, sometimes both. The key element, Steen said, tapping his report, is that this only works if the mark doesn't realize the tab is in their name until it's too late to dispute it. By the time they know there's a crowd around, it's late, they're disoriented. They just want to leave. He paused. "She's been very careful about who she chooses," he said. "Young. Male, no prior relationship with the club, someone who wouldn't know what to look for on the guest registration form." I thought about Marcus. 21 years old, seated at a private table at 11:52 p.m., looking at his phone. Someone who trusted her completely. Someone who had spent 12 years being taught that she was safe. Over 28 months, Steen found, Renata had registered 16 different guests at the Lockhart Club alone. In 12 of those instances, the guest's name appeared on a marker that was either unpaid, disputed, or settled by a third party who was later reimbursed or not. The average marker, $2,400. The pattern was consistent enough that Steen described it in his report as a structured pattern of financial exploitation using guest registration mechanisms as a vehicle for tab evasion, which is a very precise way of saying she'd been running a con, 16 people, over 2 years, using a members-only club's own policies as cover. When Hanlon forwarded Steen's findings to Detective Castellano, he was quiet on the phone for a moment and then said, "This is more than I expected." "It usually is," Hanlon said. Castellano opened a formal investigation within the week. Renata called me on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the precinct. I almost didn't pick up. Then I decided I wanted to hear her voice, not because I missed it, because I wanted to know if it would still work on me. The particular frequency of her certainty, the way she arranged words so they sounded reasonable even when they weren't. I'd spent 12 years building an immunity, and I wanted to test it. "James," she said, "I think we need to talk about this situation rationally." "Okay," I said. Marcus overreacted. It was a misunderstanding about the billing. I stepped out to take a call, and there was some confusion about who was covering the marker. I never intended for him to be caught in the middle of that. "Okay," I said again. There was a pause. She didn't like okay. She was used to me filling the silence with explanations, with questions, with the sound of someone trying to negotiate with a problem. I had been doing it for 20 years. I had gotten very good at it. Tonight, I had nothing to add. "I think if we handle this quietly without lawyers involved, we can figure out a fair arrangement that doesn't—" "Renata," I said, "there are 16 people." Silence. Real silence this time. Not strategic. The forensic accountant found 16 guests over 28 months. 12 unsettled markers. The 2 prior complaints are now documented as part of a pattern. Detective Castellano has all of it. So does Teresa Hanlon. So do I. "I don't know what you think I'm not going to handle this quietly," I said. "I'm going to let Detective Castellano and Teresa Hanlon handle it in whatever way they determine is appropriate. And I'm going to do that because that is what you do when someone hurts your child." I hung up. I sat very still in my kitchen for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went past. I thought about the first time Marcus had called her mommy instead of mama when he was 4. I thought about the custody mediation and how reasonable she'd seemed, how generous, how I'd walked out of that room thinking, at least we can be civil. I thought about how long it took me to understand that civility was just another thing she performed. The house was quiet around me. For the first time in 20 years, that felt like peace instead of loneliness. The civil complaint was filed in October. Renata's attorney, a man named Stuart Voss, who had the harried look of someone who knew exactly what kind of client he had, attempted to negotiate 3 times before Hanlon finally said, "We're not negotiating, we're proceeding." The criminal referral from Castellano's investigation went to the DA's office in November. I was told by Hanlon not to expect fast movement. These things rarely move fast. Before Hanlon finally said, "We're not negotiating, we're proceeding." The criminal referral from Castellano's investigation went to the DA's office in November. I was told by Hanlon not to expect fast movement. These things rarely move fast. But the referral itself, the formal record of the investigation, had consequences Renata hadn't anticipated. The club revoked her membership. Her employer, she'd been selling luxury real estate for a firm called Belmont Properties, received a courtesy notice from Hanlon about the pending litigation. She was placed on administrative leave within 2 weeks. Her social media went quiet. Marcus, who had spent 12 years watching his mother perform competence and generosity, Marcus saw all of it. He didn't gloat. He's not built that way. But I watched him process it with the specific gravity of someone learning that a thing they'd believed in was false. It doesn't feel like winning when your kid loses something, even if the thing they lost wasn't real. 3 months later, in January, I sat in Hanlon's office for what she called a status update. The civil complaint had moved to mediation. Voss had indicated Renata was willing to settle. The number was still being discussed, but the direction was clear. The DA's office had officially accepted the criminal referral for review. No charges yet. Hanlon said the word "yet" deliberately. 8 of the 16 Lockhart Club guests had been contacted by Castellano's team. 6 of them had agreed to provide statements. "She's going to lose the lawsuit," Hanlon said. "The question is whether she loses more than that." "That's not really my question anymore," I said. She looked at me. "My question," I said, "was whether Marcus was going to be okay." Hanlon was quiet for a moment. "What does he say?" "He's in therapy. He's back at school. He called me last week to ask if I needed anything." I paused. "That's new." Hanlon smiled. Small, real, the kind that doesn't perform anything. Then I think you have your answer, she said. There's a thing people say about revenge, that it's a dish served cold, that it doesn't actually feel the way you think it will, that justice and satisfaction aren't the same thing. I think they're right about all of it. What I felt, sitting in Hanlon's office in January, was not triumphant. It wasn't even satisfied, not exactly. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was the feeling of having done the right thing at 3:11 a.m., when the right thing was the hardest possible thing, of having stayed in my lane and let the truth travel at its own speed, of not having fixed it, not having covered it, not having swallowed it one more time so that Renata could keep running her con on the next person and the one after that. I thought about the 16 people. I thought about the 6 who'd agreed to give statements. I thought about a man in his 50s, co-parenting alone, lying in the dark at 3:47 a.m., and deciding for once to let it be someone else's problem. And then I thought about Marcus calling last week to ask if I needed anything. 12 years of groceries and prescriptions and school pickups and 3 a.m. worries, and a kid who'd looked me dead in the eyes and told me I was annoying, that's why she left. And one night of not fixing it, one night of sleeping. And now he calls to ask if I need anything. That's not nothing, that's everything.